of app developers are continuously focused on is how their users are actually engaging with their app. Are they delighted by it? Are they enjoying it? What are they disliking about the app?
Are their users sticking around in their app, or are their users even coming into their app?
So we're going to share the story of our two good friends, Jessie and Quinn.
Who may or may not be real people. But
may or may not be real, but who are two app developers who sought to build and launch their own app, and how they address these issues.
So this is their story. All right? Jessie and Quinn work at a payment startup, and they had an idea of making a really useful app for user-to-user payments that would make it easy to pay back your friends, and also maybe do in-store payments, right? And they're both pretty good engineers, and they care a lot about the user experience, like I'm sure many of you do. And so they felt quite confident that they could build this app out, follow all the best principles and design principles along the way, release it, launch, and then get a good user engagement experience out of that. And that's exactly what they did. They built the app, they launched, and they released.
Great success. There was lots of celebration, much revelry. Everyone was super excited that the app was live. And you know what? The app was out for many days, and there wasn't a single negative review.
So as a matter of fact, there were actually no reviews at all. Right? So despite all their best efforts in building this app and releasing it out, users weren't engaging it in any kind of meaningful way. Right? But why? They followed all the great design principles and all the best practices. Right? They got buy-in from their executive team with a prototype before they built it. They went through design mocks with their designers and built some really good flows throughout. They worked with their testing team and got a lot of great internal feedback within their own team and the extended company, and they got really excited about the feedback that they saw.
They also worked with their release team. They managed to figure out how to get their app live into production. They managed to work with marketing and branding and got a marketing budget, and they launched.
So why weren't they getting the engagement that they thought they would receive once they released this out into the wild? Well, let's take a look at the week-by-week breakdown of what they went through to understand this and uncover it. So let's enter week number 1, which is understanding your user experience with data and improving on it. Now, when it comes to understanding your user journeys in your app, metrics are everything, right? And like all good engineers will do, and good developers will do, Jessie and Quinn added a lot of event logging into their app so that they can dig into the metrics later to figure out what it was that was going on, and that they can uncover these core issues of what's going on with their user experience. So they logged a lot of custom events. Some of these are more important than others. Those more important events are called conversion events. Those are things that are more important than just, for example, the user opened up the app or they looked at a summary page. It'd be more things like, did they create an account? Did they send or receive a payment to a friend? Did they invite a friend to the app? That kind of thing.
So like your KPIs or your key business metrics, not necessarily something that's for operational use or for tracking workflows, but something that's really important for your business.
Right. And to log those events and to mark those conversions, they use Google Analytics for Firebase. If you haven't used this before, pretty much just by adding the Firebase Analytics SDK to your project, you get a lot of really useful out-of-the-box reports and graphs for standard things like in-app purchase revenue, user retention, daily user engagement, and so forth. But you can also do a lot of custom events that you can create and conversion events that you can also mark. And that's exactly what Jessie and Quinn did for their app. So the most important, the mega important conversion event in their case was creating an account, right? Because it's from that point that everything else in their app was possible. So they marked that as a conversion by toggling that switch right down there that you can see. So OK, this is now their conversion event. Now, it's really useful to get numbers behind these custom events and these conversion events that you could look at here. But I think what's more important than that is visualizations around the data that can give you a better idea of what's going on with your user journey, which is what they needed to figure out here for their create account use case for users coming into their app.
I mean, these visualizations are useful for getting an at-a-glance look at something. Especially when you're logging this much data, it can be a bit overwhelming, and we're not machines. We're not good at processing that in real time.
And one really good visualization tool for that data is something called a funnel. Now, some of you may be familiar with this already. And if you are, what you're probably thinking about is a closed funnel, which is, let's say, funnel A represents users who took action or triggered event A, represented in that funnel. Those users then go on to complete action B in funnel B, and so forth. And that's the closed funnel that you kind of see on the right-hand side.
So kind of like an actual physical funnel, right? You can't leave from the bottom unless it came in from the top.
Right, so that's probably what most folks are familiar with. Now, there's also the concept of open funnels. And open funnels are a little bit different. They still represent the actions that a user took in a given funnel, so funnel A for action A. But the difference there is that the other funnels next to that, the users who took that action might not have previously taken any of those other actions in the other funnels. So the user took action B in funnel B, might not have done action A in funnel A. And why am I bothering to mention all of that? The reason is because when you first go to the Google Analytics console and look at funnels, that's what you're going to see, open funnels. And if you don't know that's what you're looking at, you might be super confused because you'll see that users who committed action A had a 300% conversion rate to getting into action B, which wouldn't make sense unless you knew that, oh, I'm looking at open funnels. These events might not be connected together. But you can actually look at the funnel data in that way if you'd like, just by applying some filters, and we'll show how to do that. So what you're looking at does represent closed funnel data.
So funnels are really useful, but what did Spot Your Friend use? So they decided that the conversion event that they really cared about was create account. So they checked the workflow that led into creating that account. There were two. The first is when the users went directly to the app or Play Store and downloaded and installed the app. And the second was when they were coming in via an invite link from their friends and going through a similar workflow.
All right, so we'll look at the first case, right? So this is users who directly went to the app and downloaded it. And this is the funnel visualization you'll see in the Google Analytics console. Now, this is also counting the users who might have been invited to the app. But this is just to give a general idea for Jessie and Quinn as they're digging into the issue for what might be going on. So looking at the data here, we see that there's about 1.4 million first open events, which is pretty good.
Which actually seems pretty good, right? This is a new app, first fresh launch. 1.4 million actually installing is not bad.
So yeah, that's a really great number. And that means that their marketing team and the marketing efforts there are working because they're getting a lot of initial users coming to the app. Their conversion rate, however, into the create account event is not so great, right? It's 329,000 about, and that's a 23.2% conversion rate, which isn't that great if you consider the fact that these are users who downloaded and installed the app. And if they went through all that trouble, they're probably pretty intent on using it. So if they're not converting, there must be something wrong. So let's look at the second flow of the invite flow for users coming into the app. And this is what the funnel looks like here.
Oh, it's even worse.
So here, it's a really bad conversion rate. And there's a few additional insights that you can glean actually by looking at this graph. So the first thing is that we see that the invite link clicked event has about 1.1 million users who took that action. That means that the majority of their users are actually coming in from this invite flow, which is important to know because that means they have to make sure they get that thing really right. The next thing is their conversion rates. So 26,000 and 2.3%, which is terrible, again, considering all the trouble people went through to get to this point in the app. And so there's something wrong here, something fishy they need to identify with what's going on with their onboarding flow. And one last note before we go on to what they did with this is the filter that we're applying up top. So remember that note I mentioned about open filters? In the first graphs that we looked at, we didn't have that applied, but that was fine because there's an implicit connection between those events. Here, there might not be. So we need to apply a filter to make sure that we're not just counting anyone who created an account, but really those users who were invited to the app and took both actions. And so that's why applying that filter can give you that insight for what you're looking to, the insight you're looking to glean. And so they did that, and they said, OK, something's wrong with our invite flow. Let's take a look at what that looks like.
So actually, let's take a look at what that flow looks like in person.
And heads up, it's going to be pretty bad.
So first, what happens when you're sharing it with a friend, you create this invite link, which you can then send via SMS or email. That seems pretty straightforward, pretty normal. But when you click that invite link, what users are dropped into is this mobile web page, which has links for the Play Store or App Store. The user then has to actually go to and pick and download the right version of the app for their phone, which is not ideal.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. No.
Yeah, it's not great. Because every step you have here, you're dropping off users. Once you actually install the app, you're presented with this giant form with tons of fields that you have to fill out, and there's no context as to why you're even doing this.
So if you all are anything like me, when I download an app to fulfill some kind of use case, if the first thing I see is a bunch of different flows of going to the right store, downloading the right version, filling out a lot of details, I'm probably not going to go through all that. And maybe even worse, I'll just uninstall the app, which is definitely not what you want. So wouldn't a flow that looks something more like this be a whole lot better? So in this case on the left-hand side, it's still the same initial screen of a friend inviting their other friend to pay them back and sending them a link to the app. But what if after they clicked on that, the first thing they saw was not which store that they have to go to download the app, but they're automatically taken to the correct store based on their device, and then presented when they first open that app, download and install it, the first thing they see is the context for which they were sent here, which in this case is Megha wants me to pay her back for pizza because Megha doesn't like to do favors.
And Sumit never has cash on him, so it's a whole big thing. It's a whole big thing. But moving on to the onboarding.
I don't know about that, but let's continue on with this. So it's an example. So let's say the first thing presented is exactly why you came to this app in the first place. And then you go through that flow, you fill out a streamlined account creation process, and then you can pay your friend back. So this is a way better onboarding experience for someone who's invited into this app. And so Jessie and Quinn said that's what we need to improve because that's the flow where we're hurting, and that's exactly what they did, using something called Firebase Dynamic Links. So if you haven't used Firebase Dynamic Links before, it kind of works as just we saw. There's a single link that you'd create, and after your user clicks on that link, they'll be taken to the right store for their device automatically, whichever is appropriate. If they're clicking on it from none of those devices, they'll just go to a web page. And from after that point, once they download and install that app, there's deep link context that you'll receive in your application code that you can then extract to say, OK, why did they come to this app? What context were they in? And then present them with that screen the first time they open up the app. So let's see how they set that up.
So this is the Android code, but it works very similar in iOS as well. So here's where they generate that link that has all the context that they're going to need. In this case, it's the user ID, the amount, and the actual event. So Megha 1250 for pizza.
Yes, so this won't be the link that they'll see. It's the link that you'll be able to get in your application code. Now let's look at generating that Firebase dynamic link that the user will see. And this is what builds that part. So we get an instance of the Firebase dynamic link object. We set link, which is that the link that we just created in the previous step. And then we set a domain URI prefix for our Firebase dynamic links. You'll notice in this case, it's spotyourfriend.page.link. That special .page.link subdomain is something that Firebase can create for you. So if you don't have your own domain, or if you don't want to set up your own custom domain to host these dynamic links, although you can do that if you like, you can just automatically set this one up fairly easily through the console. And it's going to create a mini website with all the configuration files and asset files you need to host your dynamic links for you. So it's pretty quick there. And then the next call is building a short dynamic link. That's just because you don't want to present the user with like this massive link with all that metadata of the link data you need and whatever other parameters you're adding on. You can make this call to build a short version that you could send. But that's an asynchronous call. And so that's why there's an add-on complete listener call there, just to make sure that task worked. And you get that short link back. And then you add on some Android parameters and some iOS parameters that encode into the link where to go for your Android app or for your App Store app or iOS app for these users. And so that's what they did. They implemented Firebase Dynamic Links, extracted that link data to make a warm experience the first time it opens, and implemented this flow. And it actually worked.
It did. It did. It was definitely making an improvement, but it still wasn't doing enough. So let's enter week 2. A/B testing the invite flows to find the very best one for your users. So the onboarding flow change they made was doing a good job. It was helping. And the numbers were showing that. So let's take a look at the updated numbers. Sweet. So we have about 238,000 users clicking that invite link. And we have 11,000 users creating an account. So this is a 4.8% conversion rate.
Yeah, it's an improvement. It's better than the 2.3% we saw earlier, but still not a massive improvement that they were hoping for.
Yeah, it's still a very low conversion rate. So what was going on? Jessie went out to dinner with his friend Nick and invited him to use Spot Your Friend to split the cost of a bill. Nick promptly installed the app and then forgot about it for a few days. Now, Nick is a bit absent-minded, and he doesn't necessarily remember what he had to eat the last day, let alone who he had it with. But when he opened the app again a few days later, he did remember having pizza with Jessie. But he said, I know 10 different Jessies. If I opened this up even a few days later, I wouldn't really know what this was about. So that context would be useless.
And so Nick shared that feedback with Jessie, and a eureka moment had struck. Aha, so actually our warm onboarding flow is good, it's an improvement, but the reason why it's not working is because people don't always know who it was that was requesting this money, because it's just that name. What if we put the photo in there instead? So it's the photo of the friend, that way they know exactly who it is. That's a way better onboarding experience. That's what we should implement. And then Jessie was like, let's go ahead and do this.
Well, not so fast, Quinn said. So Quinn shared the app with her mom, and what she remembers her mom saying was the fact that Spot Your Friend only had text was actually what she liked about it. There weren't a lot of confusing visuals or images that distracted from the main purpose of the app. So she wouldn't have liked a photo only.
So clearly, there's different approaches that might work best based on anecdotal evidence. So what's needed here is something more scientific to figure out which version is actually preferred.
And so that's where something like A/B testing can come in handy. So you might be familiar with A/B testing, but in case you're not, let me go with the classic example of button color. Sorry. So let's say you're not sure if having a blue button or an orange button on your purchase screen will lead to larger revenue in the long run. The best way to find out is to actually run this test on real users. So you split your users into a little subset, show the different experiences to each one of them, and then just track the results and see which actually results in more conversions. Then, with that winning variant, you can roll it out to everybody. In the case of Spot Your Friend, we had 3 different variants that we were testing about how we display the inviter. First, we have what's already launched, variant A, which is text only. We have variant B, which is Nick's favorite, which is photo only. And just because we're running an experiment anyway, they also try variant C, which is including both text and photo. Maybe this will actually satisfy both Nick and Quinn's mom. So what they did was they ran this experiment using Firebase A/B testing.
But there's a problem, Megha.
Oh no, what's that?
So of course there's a problem. But
Of course there's a problem.
Did you realize that, so while it's great that they can do A/B testing and test out all these different variants and get some results to figure out which one works best, they need a way to actually inject these into the app or flag them into the app, which they don't have right now. So right now there's no photos, there's no photo and text, there's just that text-only option. So they need a way to do that.
I think I know where this is headed. Is there something Firebase can do to help?
There is. Yes, there is. And it's something called Firebase Remote Config. So for those who aren't familiar with Firebase Remote Config, you can kind of think of it as a key value store that lives in the cloud that you can push out to your end users' client devices based on different conditions. So maybe historic app usage, maybe the device locale that they've set up, maybe the local time on that user's device. So whatever conditions you like, you can kind of gate that for when you want those values to be pushed out to your clients. It also doesn't require re-downloading a new version of your app, which is nice, anytime you want to push new changes or new parameter values out. The other neat thing about it is that it ties into A/B testing. So to set up those different variants, you would use remote config parameters, set those up, set up the values you want to set there, and then have your A/B tests use those and change the values for the different variants you want to run. So let's see how they set that up for the photo case and the text-only case right here in the console. So this is the console over here, and this is the remote config section. And we've already previously created the remote config parameters that they would use, which are this profile picture on install and profile text on install. And these are just Boolean values that they can set on and off, depending on if they want that to be present in the invite flow. Now, the other thing to note about these parameters is that there's a condition applied here, this thing called invited via FDL. This is a condition that we created for only those users who came in via the Firebase dynamic link, so via that invite flow. We'll look later how we can actually set up such an audience in another example. But here, that's what they set and applied to these remote config parameters. That's only pushed out there. And let's say we wanted to add a new one, just to give you an idea of what it looks like to create one. This is how we do it. So let's say we wanted to show Spot on install. That's our...
Spot's the little dog, the favorite mascot for Spot Your Friend.
Yep, he's pretty adorable. So it'd be a shame not to use him. So let's do Spot on install. By default, it's false. But you know, if we wanted to add that into the invite flow at some point, we could by setting that up here and then applying a condition to it. But in their case, that's not what they did. So they just had these two values defined. I'll publish these changes. And so that's what they've got in their console, set up as values ready to use and download into the devices. So we can go back to the slides. So now they've got that set up in the console. let's look at how they set it up in code. And again, this is using Android, but it'll be very similar for iOS. So the first thing to do is to actually configure your remote config instance. So that's the first step here. So you obtain an instance of it, and then you configure it, one of the most important elements of which is setting the minimum fetch interval for how often your app is going to actually check for new values in the cloud from remote config that apply to this instance of the app. And for now, that's 3,600 seconds, so roughly once an hour.
And you might be tempted to have this be more frequent. And definitely when you're in developer mode, that's a great idea. You'll actually get those changes more quickly. But when you actually launch, you don't want to have something that's checking this frequently. Because if you think about it, on your end user's device, it's making these unnecessary fetches. That's not really great for your battery life.
Yeah, and on top of that, you might get rate limited as well. Because consider the fact that in the case of Spot Your Friend, they have about 1.4 million users. So that means 1.4 million instances of this running. And if that's happening every second, that's 1.4 million calls. So that's definitely going to get rate limited. So yeah, you definitely want to make this something more like once an hour in production, but more often when you're debugging. All right, so they did that. And then the last call at the bottom there, as you see, is the fetch and activate call. So that just fetches any values that apply to this device and activates remote config the very first time that this might be opened up for this user. So that's what that call is doing there. Then here's how you'd actually get those remote config values. So you just, on that instance of the remote config object, just call get boolean or get string or whatever value it is you have defined. And you just pass in the key, which is the name of the parameters that you created earlier in the console. So the profile text install key and the profile photo install key.
Now, in the case of Spot Your Friend, the experiment they were running was right on install. So what they did was they added a few second quick splash screen on the very first install, on the very first open, to allow time for that server call to complete so a user could actually enter into the experiment. So they added the splash screen with our dear friend Spot, and then they directly led into the warm onboarding that we saw before. So with this change to the app shipped and in production, they're ready to really run those A/B tests. So let's go to the console and see how they set that up. So here we have their experiment. There's some basics here. This is just for human readable text, so it's just saying so we can find it later on. But this is the interesting part. So here we're targeting everyone who has come in via the FDL. So we say includes install via FDL. At the moment, we're targeting 5% of our users. That's enough for Spot Your Friend to get a good sample size, but you might want to change this depending on how many users you have in your app in that audience. There's no activation event because we want to start exactly on install. The primary metric here, the goal, is create accounts. And so that's why we emphasize it front and center as a primary metric. There are, however, additional metrics that are generally a good idea to track. And we provide, they're automatically set, but you can delete them if you don't need them. For example, crash-free users. It's really great to be super focused on one goal, but if one of the variants is actually causing a lot of your users to crash, you want to make sure that you can take that into consideration.
Yeah, another good example is user retention. So let's say if you're a game developer and you're making a game easier for a beginner audience who just comes into it, and you're changing some parameters to make it easier for them, well, it might make the game more boring for other users who come in and negatively affect your retention. So you might want to keep that as a secondary goal to make sure you're not affecting those negatively.
Awesome. And now we get to the actual variants. These are the variants that I showed you before. The first one is the control group, which is already launched, which is where text is true and profile picture is false. And these are the same parameter names that we had defined in remote config. The second variant is the all-in-one bucket. It's text and photo, where text is true and photo is true. The final one is photo only, where text is false and photo is true. So let's see, we can actually review that one. And all we need to do is publish it, start it. And now that experiment is running and ready to start gathering data. And now back to the slides.
Right, and I think I remember at this point, it takes a while for these results to come back, which means that I might have time for coffee, and it's quite late, so I could definitely use some.
Well, actually, Jessie and Quinn did already run this experiment, so we can just go to the results right now.
All right, fair enough. So normally you might have to wait a little while for the results to come back, or more importantly, just for enough data to come in to actually make a reasonable prediction for what variant works best. But in this case, we already have the results.
Let's take a look what happened.
So in this case, the winner is photo only, which is interesting because I would have figured that text and photo would be the preferred option.
I'm with Quinn's mom. I think I would have preferred text only because there are enough apps showing me selfies or cute chinchillas. I don't really need more distractions, especially not in a payment app.
So it kind of goes to show you can't always go with your gut, and it's always useful to have a more scientific approach. And by running this A/B test, they saw that, okay, photo only is the one to go with, and they rolled it out to all their users. And looks like it worked, right? The conversion rate here is a huge improvement. So 62.3%, that's great, and more in line with what they expected.
Well, great. Now, Jessie and Quinn lived happily ever after, and their app was amazing, right?
And I can get coffee?
Yes.
No.
Darn.
Because there's another problem that they ran into, one that's very common, and that's the problem of user retention. So now at this point, they're getting a lot of users coming in. Marketing is doing a great job. Their conversion rate for creating accounts is looking good. Their A/B test worked for that. But now they're seeing that they're not getting users to stay in the app after those initial conversion events. Looking at their user retention graph in the Firebase console, this
Very
is what
dramatic.
they see.
It's very dramatic.
It's a pretty dramatic console, yes. So or graph. So you can see that almost within the first day, after users have created their accounts and started using the app, they're almost dropping off to 0% usage, which is pretty terrible. But why? What's going on?
Well, so Quinn had a sneaky suspicion that there were a bunch of users who were actually using the app, sharing a bunch of money, and then leaving. So she dug into the data a little bit more and discovered that it was the case that some of these users who were churning still had money in their account. So they were leaving free money in the app for no reason.
So that's actually like a huge call to action because no one likes to leave money behind, right? So maybe some of these users created their accounts, they received money or they sent money, but they still have money left over, and they just kind of forgot about it and stopped coming to the app, not realizing they actually have some money left in there. So that's a great call to action. If there was only a way to message these folks, email them, or somehow notify them to let them know, hey, you've got money, come back to the app, use it, do some stuff, stay in our app. But I don't think there's anything.
Well, there is. Firebase cloud messaging.
I'm not surprised.
Of course there is. So Firebase Cloud Messaging, or FCM for short, uses the exact same audiences that we saw before with A/B testing and remote config. And so we just need to create a new audience now and target those users.
So the first step in order to notify the right people to re-engage them in the app is to define an audience that represents them. So let's look at how we do that in the console. OK, so here we've already defined that audience called Have Money Are Churning, because we're very creative with our names. And so I'll edit this to take a look at what it looks like. OK, so Jessie and Quinn had the foresight to define a user property here called Money Remaining, which you can see right over here. Now, user properties are you can kind of think of them as representing user states, and you can record those with your analytics events. So whatever makes sense for your app, you can use these to configure those. The limit, I believe, is 24, 25 such user properties. In the case for Jessie and Quinn, they made one for Money Remaining. And so they can filter on this and create an audience based on that user property to say, OK, we only want to target the users who have at least $5, maybe even $1 would be better here, but at least $5 money remaining, because they still have some money left over. Now, that's the inclusive group for this audience. There's also an exclusive group, and that is we want to target users who aren't still active, because if they're still active, we don't want to bother them, let them continue using the app. So here, the way that one is defined is just by setting an exclude group over the screen view, which is basically a generic, they did anything with the app, which means that they're still using them in some way. So if screen view event is registered for this audience and the event count is greater than 0 in any 45-day period, these are still active users, so we don't want to bother them, so let's exclude that. And after they've done that, they've defined the audience that we now want to target and notify that they have money remaining. So we'll save that.
And then they're ready to go to the FCM console. So from the FCM console, you can send those campaigns, those notifications. So if we look here, we have the notification, check your pockets, Spot comes in for the saves, letting you know there's still money. So we have the similar targeting that we saw before, but in this case, we're targeting the audience Have Money Are Churning. We could target another app if we wanted to here, but for now, we'll just stick with this one. We want this campaign to be running from now until the end of time. We don't want to have to come back every day and send this message for new people in the audience. We do want to make sure, though, that we're only sending this message once. We don't want to be spamming our users and kind of annoying them with a lot of notifications that aren't relevant to them.
Otherwise, they might uninstall your app.
Exactly. They'll definitely uninstall that app. There's no conversion event that we care about here, so we can move on there. And there are no other parameters we want to provide. So we can review this, publish it, and now it's live. So if we go back to the slides, whenever users have money remaining and are churning out of the app, they'll get a gentle reminder saying, hey, come back, remember about Spot Your Friend, keep using it, and get the money that you have remaining. So if you wanted to have more customization in that message itself, like maybe the username or the actual dollar amount remaining in their account, you could use the FCM admin SDK. And that allows your servers to send a direct message to your user using their FCM token.
But in the case for Spot Your Friend, Jessie and Quinn just used this generic version, and it worked. Their user retention went up, and they were doing just fine.
But let me guess, something else went wrong before Jessie and Quinn could live happily ever after.
So far that's been the pattern, but no. Up until this point, their conversions were looking good, account creations were looking good, their retention improved, so no, everything's good.
Sweet, actually, legit celebration then.
Legit celebration, yeah,
Nice,
it's great.
nice.
That's what you
Okay.
want, right? But the story kind of gets boring when there's not more ups and downs, right?
That's true. It's more exciting when there are new challenges that you're facing or new problems that you're solving, right? That's real life.
Yes, and we promised an action-packed, no-holds-barred presentation here. So something did go wrong. And let's enter week number 4 to look at that, which is engaging your users and helping them discover. So let's say at this point, right, Jessie and Quinn were doing really good on a lot of different fronts. Their user base has grown a lot. They were getting a great initial engagement and great user retention. So they got so good, in fact, that others started to take notice. And some partners wanted to be affiliated with them. Some really big partners, in fact, some credit card companies.
Nice.
So someone from a credit card company, a representative, approached Jessie and Quinn and said, you guys have a lot of users that are active in the major cities where we have a lot of partners and brick and mortar stores who have great deals available to them. And because Spot Your Friend is a payment app, it makes sense to surface these deals in the app so that they can redeem them. And if they do, some percentage of that can go to you guys for helping surf for them.
Which is awesome. So
Right.
now Jessie and Quinn created a section in Spot Your Friend to highlight and showcase all of these deals. And they're like, okay, this is awesome. We're good to go. Everything is great.
And there's the problem. On the next slide right here is that no one is redeeming anything. So the issue now is discoverability. So it's great that the credit card companies approach them. They're surfacing their deals in the app in some section of it. But users who have been using the app aren't really navigating to that. They've not been using it for that before. They're not used to going there to use it for that purpose, and no one is redeeming anything. So what can they do to improve this? Well, they do know that users are making in-store purchases.
Yeah.
So if there was a way to notify them at that moment, at the right place, and the right time when that happens, that, hey, you just bought a pair of skis, there's a deal for ski boots, or there's a deal for ski goggles, you can take action on if it's available to them. But I don't think there's anything that can do that.
There is Firebase in-app messaging.
Oh, snap. All right, let's see it. How does it work?
So Firebase in-app messaging, or FIAM for short, allows you to configure in-app messages from the console and actually have them sent to your users' devices. You don't need to worry about shipping a new version of your app. You can create campaigns on the fly, and that day they'll come over. So let's actually take a look at the campaign they created. Let's go to the console. So now we have my favorite deal, SKU AS12. I don't know about you, it's my favorite product in the world.
Oh, yeah.
But so the way FIAM works is that you drop in the SDK, and it handles all of the UI for you. So you're given some template options, and that's what we're going to configure here. In the case of this particular alert with the deals, we want to use a modal, which is the most kind of, I'm not going to say aggressive, but it's the most very visually compelling side, where it takes up the whole screen and it takes your attention. So we have this spot alert saying that there's this new discount on Bluetooth headphones. So the image that we provided here is hosted on Firebase storage. It doesn't have to be, but the integration works really well if you want to use it that way. There's a button here which has the call to action. This is how the user will actually understand more about the deal so they can then redeem it. We're using our good friend, Firebase Dynamic Links, again here, to give a deep link into that section of the app which actually has the deal. Now we're using the same targeting that we know and love from the other Firebase products, so I can skip past here. And we have the same scheduling. It's from now until the end of time. The interesting thing here is, as Sumit said, we want this to be a very contextual message. So in this case, when a user actually completes the in-store purchase, that's when the message is going to pop up. And again, we want to be mindful of our users. We're only going to show this message once per device. We do care about a conversion event here, which is redeeming the deal. So I'll say that here. We publish this. We take a quick check to review it. And now we're good to go, and this is live. So if we go back to the slides, when the purchase is complete and we send that analytics event, users will now see this message telling them about a new deal that we've just added to the app.
And so that's what Jessie and Quinn implemented to make these users discover these deals at the right place and at the right time and start redeeming it. And that worked, of course. And they started actually making some money and becoming profitable, which is awesome, because that means that everything has been going right. They're ready to live happily ever after, and we can get some coffee, right?
Yes, and so they had this really happy pattern that they continued of going to the metrics, understanding their users, and iterating and improving the app experience to create this loyal group of very delighted users who kept using the app. So there were more deals that were coming in from other companies because of that engagement, and they were able to make all of that great revenue, making Spot Your Friend the giant, enormous app success that we all know and love because everyone has this app, obviously.
Of course, yes. I'm the #1 user, and I'm sure you all downloaded it and installed it. So, yes. All right. So this is the story of Jessie and Quinn and the trials and tribulations they went through as they released their app and tried to get more user engagement and get the profitability in the end. Hopefully, through that process of how they resolved some of these issues, some of these things made sense for your apps as well and are good takeaways for what you can use for your own apps, whether that's with Firebase or whatever else. And if you have follow-ups.
Yeah, we'll be in the sandbox. It's over that-a-way, the Firebase sandbox, afterwards. So feel free to ask us any questions or just drop by to say hi. But yeah, thank you very much. And congratulations surviving through the last session of I/O. And happy developing.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye all.